Judith Hawkey was born on January 9, 1967. She grew up with her parents in a provincial area in the state of Ohio, USA. Judith was bright and cheerful until an accident happened in her life. At the age of 3, she was hit by an automobile. The girl received quite serious injuries and had a long recovery. Against this background, she lost contact with her peers and friends for a while, and then faced problems at school. Fortunately, over time, the child managed to recover. The girl fully recovered and returned to a full-fledged life. The parents' relationship was not going well. They had a rift which led to a divorce. After that, Judith's mother moved to another city. There her mother remarried. The relationship with her second husband was not better than with her first husband, and they often quarreled. Communication with the biological father was hindered by distance. Judith grew up and repeatedly thought about moving away, but her mother forbade it at least until she reached adulthood. The atmosphere in the house was heating up. However, she wasn't going to put up with her circumstances. In high school, she decided it was time for a radical change. At 17, Judith dropped out of school and traveled to Arizona to visit her biological father. Here, the girl did not live long. She began a relationship with her boyfriend, with whom she moved to Alaska. But the everyday life turned out to be far from the ideas of young people, as it often happens. Domestic problems ruined all the romance and their relationship. She eventually moved back to Ohio with her boyfriend. In 1991, the couple could not restore the relationship and decided to break up. Judith had a new boyfriend named Scott. From the very beginning of acquaintance, the connection developed quite rapidly. All this led to pregnancy and the conclusion of marriage. Soon their joint daughter was born. For a few years, they maintained a normal relationship. But as quickly as their affair began, it ended just as quickly, and they divorced. The biological father decided that the child's mother could not cope with parenthood and wanted to raise the daughter himself. Judith didn't object and left her daughter to her father. In 1998, Judith met Robert Brininger, who turned out to be a divorced man. He lived with a son named Corey. The child's mother had run away and was not seeing her son. Judith and Robert hit it off immediately and began dating. The man lived with his child in a small house. Later, they got married. It seemed that the heroine of the story had finally found her little happiness. Probably to demonstrate the seriousness of her intentions towards the new man, she even decided to adopt Corey, as he was growing up without a mother at all. This became a great joy for the single father, as he had long dreamed of restoring a full family. Robert worked a lot, so he could not pay enough attention to his son. The boy was now in the care of his spouse, and Judy was the perfect opportunity to fill in the gaps. Robert worked at a steel mill in a neighboring town, where there were often night shifts, and he was very tired. Because of this, he had developed the habit of going to bed around noon and always using earplugs so that no extraneous sounds would distract him from his rest. At that time, his life partner was a housewife, dealing with her son and the household. It seemed that the family's life had settled down and everyone was comfortable. November 3, 2003 looked like a normal day for the Breininger family. In the afternoon, 10-year-old Corey got off his school bus. He was on his way home from school. On this day, his stepmother met him at the bus stop, although she usually did not. The schoolboy got off with several other classmates who lived in the neighborhood from their home. It happened shortly before 4 p.m. Judith walked Corey to the house where Robert was resting after the night shift. The boy went inside. The woman did not go in with him. She walked several other neighborhood children to their homes, fearing for the safety of the school children. Nothing seemed to portend bloodshed. Nevertheless, it was only minutes away. The sound of gunfire pierced the quiet neighborhood. Meanwhile, Corey had entered his father's room, pointed the shotgun at his head, and pulled the trigger. A sleeping man received a fatal shotgun blast to the face. Robert died instantly. The boy then called 911 and told the dispatcher that he had accidentally used a firearm in his father's home. A 10-year-old boy didn't think an innocent prank could lead to tragedy. He didn't expect the shotgun to be loaded. He just wanted to play, but accidentally shot his father. Corey asked for help. The stepmother ran into the house to help and was shocked by what she saw. When the police arrived at the house, the boy was in a state of shock. He immediately confessed to the law enforcement officers about what had happened. He said that it was all an accident. He showed the place where he had taken the shotgun, as well as brochures for the proper handling of firearms, which he had also familiarized himself with shortly before his death. His father was showing him the rules of handling a hunting rifle, since so many people in the area used shotguns for self-defense and hunting. They were just getting ready to hunt. Robert was shot dead in his bed. It was impossible to help the 34-year-old man. He died of his wounds before paramedics and police arrived. The cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the head. Forensic investigators who examined the scene decided that the boy was lying. The detectives agreed with their story. It seemed implausible that Corey decided to practice using a gun in his sleeping father's room, and the criminologists found out that the barrel of the shotgun was a few centimeters from the head of the victim, which also did not add up in the story of the boy. This was evidenced by the nature of the injuries sustained, as well as traces of gunpowder gases found on the victim's skin and bedding. It was also established that shortly before the tragedy, Robert had been telling off his son for problems with his performance at school. It has not been ruled out that the quarrel could have been the real motive for the murder, and the attempt to practice with a shotgun was actually a deliberate act of revenge. Nevertheless, to charge a 10-year-old with murder sounded absurd. The public also pressed investigators, arguing that Corey could not be held responsible for the unfortunate prank. He always seemed like a good boy. Despite all the inconsistencies uncovered during the investigation, the police believed the boy's story was real. The child was not charged with murder and was never held responsible for what happened. The murder was written off as an accident. Law enforcement officers did not even try to consider other versions of the incident and possible involvement of third parties. Detectives were not deterred by the fact that after Robert's death, Judith, as beneficiary, received a decent $500,000 insurance payout on his life. The woman then took Corey and simply left town. To avoid gossip, nothing was known about her life for several years. 7 years after the tragedy, in October 2010, the heroine of the story married a man named Gary. He took her and the boy in. He was very touched by Judith's life story, the tragedy with her ex and the adoption of the boy. It seemed like life was starting to get better. Corey gradually recovered and went to college. But in March 2012, 19-year-old Corey unexpectedly told one of his teachers what really happened to his dad that fateful day. The tragedy that happened to his own father was no accident. His story struck a teacher, and he involved other colleagues. The young man spoke to several teachers at the institution, repeating stories about the tragedy with Robert. The child said that his stepmother was responsible for his father's death, and it was Judith who deliberately directed him into a room with a gun in his hands and forced him to shoot his father. In addition, the boy claimed that he was the victim of stepmother's abuse, which he suffered for several years after his biological father's death. School officials took the story to the police. Detectives were amazed by what they heard and decided to talk to the schoolboy personally. He told the police the story in detail. According to the young man, his stepmother deceived him. She told Corey the story that his father suffered from a serious, malignant brain tumor. The woman convinced the schoolboy that doctors could not help his father, as the disease was at a deep stage and he would soon die. The man had allegedly talked to Judith about this earlier and said that he wanted to be killed, as it would help his family to receive a large payout from the life insurance policy. That way they wouldn't need anything after he died. And supposedly the murder was his father's last will and testament. Corey wanted no part of it, but Judith insisted that his father had asked him to do it. The boy stubbornly resisted. According to the young man's confession, on that fateful day, when he returned from school, his stepmother met him at the bus stop. Judy gave him detailed instructions, telling him that the shotgun was in the laundry room and it was already loaded, and that his father was asleep and already set up to die. The boy was expected to take a firearm and shoot his sleeping father in the head, thus easing his agony. The boy began to resist shooting again, but his stepmother persuaded him in every way possible. She explained that due to his young age, Corey would not be held responsible for the murder as an adult. This would allow their family to avoid trouble with the law altogether. The woman convinced the child that he was doing a good deed by ending the torment of the closest person. After that, Judith sent the boy to the house with an important mission so that Corey could carry out what he had planned without any problems, and herself took the other children to their homes to provide an alibi for the shooting. During this period, Robert was sleeping with his ears in, so he proved to be an easy target. The native son entered the bedroom, placed the heavy weapon on the bed a few centimeters away from the man, and pulled the trigger. However, the child initially lacked the strength to fire the shot, so he tried again. This time the weapon fired, and the shot charge killed his father instantly. The schoolboy then dropped the shotgun near the body and immediately contacted 911. He told a prearranged story about the accidental discharge. In Corey's opinion, the whole thing was carefully planned by his stepmother. She gave him detailed instructions on how to behave at the police station, what to say to law enforcement officers. He followed all those instructions exactly. It wasn't until the blood flooded Robert's bed that he began to realize what had happened. There was no bringing his father back. At first, the women cheered him up, promising him that now they would have no problems. They would live safely, and no one would suspect them of committing a planned murder. She convinced Corey that his father was doomed anyway, longing for death and asking for it. Therefore, the shooting could not be considered murder. The stepmother called what had happened a much better option than an agonizing death in a hospital room. The man quickly passed away in his sleep without experiencing any pain. Initially, it was indeed a comfort to the child, but gradually, he began to realize that he had made a mistake. Corey learned that his father was not sick, and therefore did not ask to be killed, and his stepmother had lied to him. Although Judith's plan worked, after that, the boy's life became unbearable. Corey admitted that she beat him constantly. She did it almost daily. Judith even repeatedly arranged dangerous situations in which he could be seriously hurt. The schoolboy said that she forced him to climb scaffolding and persuaded him to jump from a great height, as well as once on Halloween, right in a costume threw him into a pond in the hope that the child would drown. In his opinion, Judith was making every effort to get rid of the measles. In addition, the young man provided the police with very important information because, in his opinion, his stepmother had a new target, namely her new husband, Gary, whom she had married 2 years before the shocking confession. According to Corey, she repeatedly tried to poison the man by adding some suspicious powders to his coffee. All these statements of the young man shocked the investigators, and they began to scrutinize and check all his testimonies. Of course, the first thing they brought in for questioning was the new suspect, Judith. The woman was enraged by the words of her adopted son. She denied her involvement in Robert's murder and the attempted murder of Gary. Judith insisted that all these stories were figments of Corey's imagination. But her words lacked credibility, and the detectives continued their investigation. On October 28, 2013, the trial began with Corey as the prosecution's star witness. He described all of his stepmother's perfidy and cruelty, including pressure and coercion on her part to kill his father. Several other witnesses also testified in court that Judith was quite capable of murder. From the beginning of the trial, the relationship between the adopted boy and his stepmother raised many questions. There were several teachers who confirmed the facts of possible abuse of the teenager. According to teachers, they repeatedly saw bruises on Corey's body. At first, they wrote it off to the teenager's inadequacy, but the bruises were getting bigger and bigger, and this raised doubts. At the same time, no one had ever noticed that the woman abused the boy or subjected him to physical or moral pressure. The woman's lawyers insisted that there had never been a single case of cruelty by Judith recorded by the police or medics, and the teacher's opinion was based entirely on the teenager's words. In addition, Corey's inner circle had never heard before that his shooting of his father had been provoked by anyone. He did not tell his friends about this story of his foster mother's possible involvement in the incident until the very same dialogue with the teacher. Initially, after shooting his father, Corey did not point the gun at Judith. The investigators carefully observed the behavior of the boy and his stepmother, but did not notice anything suspicious in their relationship. It seemed that the schoolboy was completely calm towards the woman. Even the psychologists saw no signs that the boy was afraid of Judith or that there was any tension between them. There were no bruises on the boy's body at that point, which Corey later described. After the murder investigation and the case was closed, all law enforcement officials were convinced that the shooting was accidental. The turning point was Corey's confession to teachers in 2012. Otherwise, the case would have remained dusty in the police archives, even though there was no direct evidence against the accused. But Corey's testimony made a strong impression on all those involved in the trial. On November 8, 2013, a jury found Judith guilty of all charges. The court sentenced the 46-year-old woman to life in prison without parole. Corey spoke to members of the media. The young man claimed that finally, the killer got what she deserved. He talked about carrying the burden, suffering years of abuse. Finally, it's all in the past now. But the story doesn't end there. Judith was outraged by the sentence, which was based on the mere words of Corey, who resented her. In 2016, Judith and her lawyers filed an appeal, which was accepted and heard, and her conviction was overturned. The judge found that 3 key trial participants who testified against the woman had relied on the hearsay of a prosecution witness at the first hearing. That person turned out to be the same teacher to whom Corey had told the story of the conspiracy on his mother's part. Among them was a doctor and a mental health professional who had worked on the prosecutor's side during the first trial. In the judge's opinion, they were all biased. During the trial, defense attorneys pointed out numerous inconsistencies not only in Corey's testimony, but also with the actual evidence found at the crime scene. In Judith's opinion, the boy was angry at his father because he was going to send him to military school because of his bad grades. Corey didn't want to do that. but Robert was going to take him against his will. In Judith's opinion, that was the motive for the murder. A new trial was scheduled. When Corey found out about it, he vowed on his social media page to defend his freedom and independence to the last, so he would fight to keep his stepmother behind bars no matter what. At the retrial, Judith used Alfred's confession. The idea is that a person does not admit guilt of a crime, but admits that the prosecution has enough evidence to convict him. At the same time, she continued to insist on her innocence and accused Corey of making up all those stories. Judith had many supporters who believed that the woman was innocent and wrongly convicted. After all, there was no evidence against her. At the same time, there were people who were convinced that the stepmother had indeed forced her adopted son to kill his own father. On the day of the shooting, one of the neighbors saw the stepmother greeting the schoolboy after he arrived by bus, which was unusual for her. She had never met Corey before. Judith helped him at the bus stop, even gave him a hug, which was unusual for a woman's manner with a boy. Usually she was rather cold to everyone, including Corey. This time, she seemed to be much kinder and gentler than usual. When police officers arrived on the call, she also tried to reassure Corey remained calm and affectionate, which was also considered atypical for her. According to close friends and family acquaintances, Judith was very reserved and showed little emotion despite the tragedy of the situation. That didn't make her guilty, but it did increase suspicion, as if she knew full well what the boy was to do. At the same time, she did not offend in any way, and in the following days, just the day after the man's death, Judith contacted the insurance company. She quickly gathered all the necessary documents to receive the payment, including certificates from the deceased's job. In the shortest possible time, the woman received $500,000, for which Robert's life was insured. Naturally, such haste and lack of grief seemed too suspicious to law enforcement officers. In their practice in such cases, widows were usually the murderers. The prosecutor believed that the rush to get the insurance payment may have been due to the woman's desire to get the money before she became a suspect. It is worth noting that after his father's death, Corey was able to get a similar insurance payment from his employer. As it turns out, Robert was insured annually at work. Judith was not the beneficiary of this policy, but the recipient of the money was his son. The prosecution believed that the woman had received a double benefit from the death of her spouse. There were many contradictions and inconsistencies in this story, which were revealed by the woman's defense lawyers. After Corey's confession of guilt to his stepmother, the police had a lot of conversations with the boy. In particular, attention was drawn to the incident with scaffolding, on which the young man climbed at the insistence of his stepmother, and then fell from a fairly great height, receiving several injuries. The investigation found medical records that confirmed what happened. Corey blamed his stepmother for the fall, claimed that she was the one who forced him to climb. Clinic staff did not note anything suspicious that would suggest the regular beatings and physical abuse that Corey complained of. The young man claimed that he was abused daily by his stepmother, who beat and even tortured him. Such cruel behavior of the woman could not but leave traces. There should have been injuries on the boy's body, bruises in various stages of healing, but none of this could be found, which was strange. In addition, the young man claimed that his mother had taken him home from the medical center early against his wishes. At the same time, the woman also ignored the demands of the trauma doctors, who believed that the victim should undergo the entire course of treatment. A check of the center's records failed to confirm these words. The boy underwent a full course of treatment. Only after that, Judith picked him up. According to the documents, the specialists confirmed the absence of serious injuries and health problems. In fact, Corey was released home, and Judith did not violate anything. The family was then placed under the supervision of the Social Welfare Service. Further checks also failed to find any bruises or signs of abuse that the boy said he had suffered. Corey claimed that his stepmother did not give him food, but there was no mention in the medical report that he was malnourished, emaciated, or other such problems. Communication with other teachers and family acquaintances revealed that the teen had changed his story several times. One theory is that the shot was fired from a dog that dropped the shotgun. A man who became Judith's boyfriend a few years after the tragedy also told the story of measles. In this version, he allegedly tripped over a shotgun lying on the floor. This caused the shotgun to go off in his father's head. This version was first voiced by the boy in 2008. Naturally, all these stories were false, because the shot was fired at close range. Later, the police talked to the psychiatrist with whom Corey was under observation. According to the young man's confession, he repeatedly slept in the laundry room because his mother had deprived him of a room. He complained about the lack of a bed, but this turned out to be a lie. In fact, all this time he had his own room. Numerous photographs were found to confirm this fact. Corey claimed that after the services arrived at the murder scene, he sat with his stepmother in the ambulance for a long time. He admitted that during this period, she gave detailed instructions on what and how to tell law enforcement officers. The police themselves refuted these words, as they did not allow Judith and the foster son any privacy immediately after their arrival. They talked to them separately to verify their testimonies. Even psychologists have questioned the very ability of a 10-year-old child to have such a degree of control to adhere to a stepmother's fictitious legend, barely having dealt with a loved one. Accusations of trying to poison Gary's new spouse were not confirmed. The man passed an environmental assessment. There was nothing wrong with his health. No traces of toxins were found. After that, Corey admitted for the first time that he lied, because he was not sure that the stepmother really added some poisons to the stepfather's coffee. It was probably just sugar. Later, there were witnesses who noticed the striking similarity between Corey's story and the book. It was about a story about abuse. The author of the book was abused for a long time as a child. This story could have been the prototype for Corey's lie. It became a bestseller in some states. Supposedly, Corey read it shortly before his father died, but he denied such speculation. He claimed to have been abused from the age of 4, describing how the behavior of loved ones became increasingly aggressive. Among the stories borrowed from the book were torture with a lighter, no room and food of his own, isolation, scraps from a dog bowl, beatings and ice-cold showers as a way of punishing the child. All of this was actually described in a story he had supposedly read in the school library. It even had a chapter about how the boy was tried to drown by being thrown off a boat with his clothes on. As the book turned out, the incident also occurred on Halloween. Defense counsel wondered if the confession that Judith beat him, didn't feed him, and threw the child in the pond was a lie. What prevented Corey from making up the rest of the story about the shooting? Defense counsel believed that Corey was lying about his stepmother's involvement in his father's murder and just wanted to draw attention to himself. Despite the contradictions, Corey was considered a reliable witness, and it was only much later that he began to be seen as untrustworthy. The reason for this was the constant lies that the story underwent. Each time he supplemented the story with new chapters from a book about a child who had been bullied as a child. What played against Judith was her notoriety in the community of the town where she lived with Robert and the adopted boy. She received a 10-year sentence, 5 of which she has already served in prison. After these events, Corey rehabilitated himself in one way or another. He maintained a YouTube channel called Corey's Adventures for a while, where he amassed more than 2,000 subscribers. In 2012, according to his social media posts, he even started a relationship with a girl. The young man admitted that he had finally recovered and could fully enjoy the joys of life, which were so cruelly tried to take away from him. Regarding the story associated with his stepmother, Corey stands on his own to the last. He continues to maintain that all the stories he has told are true. He has never been charged in connection with his father's death. Judith was released in 2023, but her fate is unknown. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I was glad to see you today. See you soon.